The poster shouldn't have existed. But it did, stuck to the corner lamppost, drenched in the early morning drizzle. I saw it as I was returning from my night shift at the local paper, the wind whipping against the Maple Diner's neon lights, which blinked erratically. It was a missing person poster, printed in black and white with my face on it. The detail that stopped me in my tracks wasn't the photo, it was the date. Missing, March 18th, 2035. The problem was my watch, my phone, and all the newspapers said it was still 2025. For a moment I thought it was a cruel joke. Maybe some intern trying to play a prank on me, or one of those urban art projects that confuse more than they provoke reflection. But when I touched the paper, it was too old. The upper left corner was already crumbling into fibers. The smell of damp and rust clung to my fingers, and the ink was partially faded, as if it had spent years exposed to rain and weather. No one in their right mind would age paper like that for fun. I took the poster, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the leather briefcase I always carry. I'd covered strange cases before, unexplained disappearances, lapses in collective memory, coincidences that defied statistics. But never anything that directly involved me. It felt like looking into a mirror reflecting the future. And in that moment, something inside me, perhaps journalistic instinct, perhaps pure fear, told me I shouldn't tell anyone. Yet back in my car, the engine sound was drowned out by a high-pitched hum from the radio, even though it was off. It sounded like dead station interference, a band of white noise between two frequencies. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 2:17 a.m. I blinked, and for a split second the second hand moved backward. I swallowed hard. I started the car, but the sound persisted, a rhythmic hiss, as if someone were trying to modulate words in Morse code. I drove home, a small single-story house in the suburbs of Greenfield, Indiana. The streets were deserted except for a pickup truck parked on the corner, with its engine running and headlights on low beam. I couldn't see who was inside. As I parked, I noticed something strange. All the lights in the neighboring houses were blinking in the same pattern. A double blink, a pause, a single blink. It repeated like a mechanical breath. Reflexively, I glanced up at the sky. No stars, no moon. I walked in and locked the door. The living room clock read 2:23 a.m. However, the one on the microwave said 3:41 a.m. I'd synchronized them less than a week ago. The difference made no sense. I tossed the folder on the table and pulled out the poster. The photo showed the exact same haircut I had now, the same denim jacket I'd been wearing that night, even the same scratch on my chin. There was only one difference. In the image, behind me there was something blurry, an indistinct human shape, almost like a reflection that didn't belong in the scene. I took my phone out of my pocket and photographed the poster. When I opened the gallery, the image flashed and disappeared. No saved files, no record. The app simply closed. I tried again, and this time the phone restarted itself. When the screen came back on, the clock showed 1:01, and the wallpaper had changed to a solid gray, no icons, nothing. Just a plain background. No call history, no messages. It was as if the device had been reset, but I'd never touched the settings. I sat on the couch, my heart beating slowly, not from panic, but from methodical disbelief. I looked at the sign on the table and noticed something engraved in microtext at the bottom. Barely visible, temporal file, lot 14B. It looked like an archival code, like the ones I'd seen on government documents. When I was working on stories about the disappearance of experiment records from the 1980s, the kind of code that shouldn't be on anything. Civilian, the lamplight flickered 3 times. A sharp click came from the outlet, and the smell of ozone filled the air. For a moment I thought I heard a second sound, a metallic click coming from the kitchen, like the click of an old camera. I walked slowly toward it. The room was the same, but the mirror over the sink reflected something different. My face, slightly out of focus, as if the reflection moved half a second after me. I tested it by moving my head, and saw with absolute clarity the reflection flickering before I did. I returned to the living room and sat down again. I wrote the exact date, time and location of the find in my notebook, as I would in any investigation. Poster found 2:17 a.m. Maple Diner, identical photo. Date 2035. The last line, however, I wrote almost without thinking. He seems to know I found him. I don't know why I chose those words. Perhaps because, as I wrote, the poster vibrated slightly, as if breathing in the flickering light of the lamp. When I finally looked back at the paper, I noticed a new crease, one I swear hadn't been there before. It formed a diagonal line across my face, and beneath the crease, printed in tiny letters, a new sentence had appeared. "You are 5 days away from disappearance." Over the next few days, I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. I continued going to the newspaper, writing stories about local politics and routine reports on infrastructure problems in Greenfield. The kind of work no one really reads, but it keeps the routine stable. Still, since that early morning, something felt off. The air seemed denser, as if the entire atmosphere was slightly delayed in sound. When people spoke, there was an imperceptible echo, a tiny delay between the movement of lips and the words. I began timing this interval, exactly 0.7 seconds. In the office, things were also strange. The wall clock in the filing department moved its second hand at irregular intervals, as if hesitating before moving forward. I asked Amy, the morning intern, if she noticed the same thing. She said there hadn't been a clock there for months, that the stand had been empty since the old one broke. I looked in the same spot and saw the clock ticking. The ticking was clear, mechanical. When I blinked, the stand was indeed empty. I sat down, trying to hide the trembling in my hands. That night at home, the buzzing sound returned. It wasn't coming from the radio or the TV. It seemed to be coming from the walls. A low electric sound, constant, as if something were vibrating within the structure of the house. Each night, the volume increased. I pressed my ear against the drywall and swear I heard fragments of voices, snippets of meaningless phrases, mixing technical words and numerical coordinates. One of them repeated frequently, Lot 14 Bravo, the same code printed on the poster. The pattern wasn't random. I wrote down the sequences and discovered they resembled geographic coordinates. An uninhabited area, 40 kilometers north of Indianapolis. I tried to ignore it, but my body seemed to react before reason. My sleep hours shortened. Food tasted metallic. The people I talked to seemed slightly different with each encounter. The barber, for example, greeted me as if he'd never seen me before, even though I'd been getting my hair cut there for years. I asked if he was joking, and he laughed uncomfortably. In the salon mirror's reflection, I swear there were two versions of me, one blinking, the other standing still, watching. At the office, I found a manila envelope on my desk with no return address. Inside was a single, slightly yellowed Polaroid photograph showing the Maple Diner sign. At first, nothing out of the ordinary, until I noticed that the reflection in the window was my own image again. Only this time I was wearing different clothes. In the bottom corner of the photo was a note in blue pen. "Took this the day I last saw you." No signature. No clue as to who had left it. I showed the photo to Amy, but she only saw the sign. She said no one was reflected. I began reviewing all the old missing persons case files in Greenfield. 32 cases spanning the past 20 years. Half of them had identical dates, descriptions, and locations. Only the names changed. They seemed slightly tweaked copies of the same event. In some, the physical descriptions of the victims resembled mine. Height, hair, age. I went to the county records office to check the originals. The clerk, an elderly man named Paul, looked at the serial number and said something that still echoes in my head. These records were sealed by federal order in 2035. I asked to see the restriction document, but he just shook his head. He said the file didn't officially exist yet, that it was scheduled to be created, his exact words, in 2034. That sentence left me speechless for several seconds. How can something be sealed before it exists? I asked. He just smiled, confused, and replied, "You're the first to notice." His voice sounded sincere, but his eyes seemed to be glancing slightly to the side of my face, as if there were something invisible between us. That night I got a call. No number, just the word unknown flashing on the screen. I answered, and the same buzzing I'd heard in the walls filled my ears. Then a voice, distorted, metallic but human, whispered, "Don't investigate Lot 14B." I asked who it was, but the connection dropped. The clock in the room read 11:11, and at that exact moment all the lights flickered again. I ran to the circuit breaker. Nothing unusual. When I returned, the sign on the table was gone. In its place, an envelope identical to the newspapers. Inside, a new copy of the poster. But now the printed date had changed. March 17th, 2035. One day before the disappearance, I sent a voice message to an FBI friend I'd worked with on an old story about temporal data fraud. He replied 2 hours later, sounding serious. This code 14B appears in reports on temporal deceleration experiments conducted by government contract laboratories between 1989 and 1992. Most have been erased from the records, but I can send you what's left. When the email arrived, it contained only a photo of a corroded metal plate. Temporal Stability Project, Greenfield Facility. Below, the motto, "Preserve the Sequence." As I read it, the noise on the radio transformed into something clearer. Truncated phrases, mixed with my own voice repeating the last words I had just spoken. I recorded the sound, but when I played it back it was silence. Just a deep silence, the kind that seems to absorb the air around it. At that moment I realized that perhaps the sign wasn't a warning, but a confirmation of something that had already begun. And maybe, just maybe, I was already fading away. The next morning, I woke to my alarm going off at 6:30 a.m., but the sun hadn't yet risen. The window had a bluish-grey tint, as if the natural light were filtering through an invisible film. I walked to the bathroom and noticed something subtle but impossible. The reflection in the mirror was watching me before I moved. It was a tiny mismatch, milliseconds perhaps, but enough to chill me to the core. I touched the glass, cold, but behind the thermal sensation, I felt a pulse, as if something alive were watching from the other side of the surface. At breakfast, the local paper carried an article I had written myself 2 days earlier, but with changes. The headline was the same, the text almost identical. Except for one detail, the byline wasn't mine. A different name appeared in the footer. Henry T. Grayson. I don't know anyone by that name. I called the editor, but he claimed I had emailed the article the night before. I checked my account history and indeed the file was there, sent at 2:43 a.m. The problem was I was asleep at that time. Or at least I thought I was. I returned to the bedroom and found the bed untouched, the sheets taut as if no one had slept there. The pillows were perfectly aligned, and my wristwatch, which I always keep on the table, read 2:43 a.m., frozen, its hands motionless. A distant metallic sound echoed through the house, something like a blade scraping against metal. When I opened the back door, the sound immediately stopped. The wind died. Not even the insects made a sound. For a second, the whole world seemed to pause. Then slowly, the sound returned, but in a different sequence, as if time had restarted from the wrong point. I decided to record everything on video. I grabbed the news camera, adjusted the focus, and started recording the living room clock, telling the time aloud. When I reviewed the recording, I noticed something unsettling. My voice was narrating seconds before the hands moved, as if I were describing the future, with fractional precision. The delay was constant, exactly 3.6 seconds. In any other context, this would have been just a technical glitch. But in that house, in that sequence of events, it seemed more proof that something was out of sync, and worse, increasingly in sync with me. As I left for work, I saw the truck parked on the corner again. The same model, same license plate, but the paint job was different. Metallic blue, not silver. When I tried to take a picture, my phone froze, and the screen displayed for a few seconds the message, "Signal out of sequence." No app showed any record of this notification afterward. Later, I realized the car had completely disappeared. I asked my neighbor if she had seen anything, but she replied, confused, "Which corner? There's been nothing here for weeks." Her tone was firm, but her eyes flickered out of sync like a video frame with a delay. In the newsroom, everything was almost the same. My colleagues seemed to remember me, but they called me by a different name, Henry. At first, I thought it was an inside joke, until Amy asked if I was back from my trip. I asked what trip she was talking about, and she replied, "You were gone for almost a week." I checked the calendar and nearly spilled my coffee. The date was March 15th. I distinctly remembered the previous day being the 12th. 3 days had disappeared. No gaps in sleep, no memory of travel. Just a skip. I went to my editor to demand an explanation. He seemed irritated, but also frightened. He said I'd sent him several meaningless emails full of garbled sentences and corrupted images, He showed me one of them, an audio file with my voice repeating the words Lot 14B in a rising tone for almost 3 minutes. The problem was that the recording was dated 2035. The email system recorded the date as manually modified, but without any technical log. It was as if the file had come from a future system. I returned home before dusk, trying to understand the pattern. I compared the old poster with the new one. Both versions were identical except for the paper texture. The newer one appeared to be printed with more advanced technology, with almost no grain. Under ultraviolet light, I discovered something hidden, an invisible QR code. When scanned, the link led to a page outside the common domain, govarchive14b.sec. The site required biometric authentication. When I placed my finger near the sensor, the page flashed and briefly displayed a single line of text. File successfully accessed. User, Henry T. Grayson. That night, I wrote everything down in my notebook, my handwriting shaky. For the first time, I doubted my own identity. The name Henry seemed to echo in my mind in a familiar, almost intimate way, as if I'd used it before. When I turned on the radio, the same interference filled the room, but now accompanied by a clearer voice saying, "The timer is almost complete." I glanced at the wall clock and realized that with each tick, the seconds were repeating in a loop. 2:58, 2:58, 2:58. I closed the notebook, turned off the lights and sat in the dark. The clock's ticking finally stopped, and for a moment, I heard something that sounded like an old recording of my own voice saying, "With absolute calm, you are no longer in the right time." The next day, the world seemed rearranged. The streets of Greenfield were where they'd always been, but something in the geography had shifted. The Maple Diner, where it all began, was now 2 blocks away from its original location, and no one seemed to notice. The old hardware store, which had closed years ago, was open again, its sign freshly painted. I walked in, searching for logic in the impossible, and the owner, a gray-haired man in a stained apron, greeted me as if he'd known me for decades. "Henry, still collecting those strange ribbons?" he asked. I pretended to agree, but inside I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. None of this was a dream. It was too much consistency. The feeling of displacement intensified as the day wore on. Objects shifted when I looked away. The coffee I left on the table cooled in seconds, as if time around it were passing faster. My wristwatch, now inconsistent, gained and lost time at random intervals, but curiously always returned to the same time. 2:17 a.m., the moment I found the first poster. I tried to write down the anomalies, but the pages of my notebook began repeating the same text, line after line, without me writing it down. "You are 4 days away from disappearance." In an attempt to rationalize, I searched for the address of the coordinates I'd heard through the walls, the facility north of Indianapolis. I drove there on a cloudy day, under a light that seemed to never fully reach the ground. The country road ended at an iron gate, partially swallowed by vegetation. A rusty sign hung twisting in the wind. Greenfield Research Annex. There were old cameras, but all dead, hanging like blind eyes. I went in. Inside, the silence was almost solid, no echoes. Just that low, familiar hum vibrating in the air, constant, almost organic. The corridors were long and identical, their walls covered in white tiles that reflected an artificial light with no apparent source. I found a room with partially burned files, stamped with the same code, 14B. Among the papers was a list of names. I recognized mine or Henry's written in blue pen. Below it a note, duplicate stabilized. Phase 3, partial integration. Beside it a photo of me sitting in a metal chair, electrodes attached to my head. The date, March 18th, 2035. I tried to breathe deeply, but the air felt thin, heavy as water. It was like seeing the future watching me. I continued exploring and found a small, still working monitor powered by a self-contained generator. On the screen, undated security footage appeared. I pressed play. The footage showed people walking down the same hallways I was in now, but everything seemed mirrored. Someone was holding a missing person sign identical to mine. When the figure turned, I saw my own face. The tape jumped, distorted, and the lights in the room flickered. A frame froze, my face staring straight into the camera, but with an older, weary look, and a small cut on my eyebrow that I hadn't yet had. I hurried out. The air outside was cold and dense. On the horizon, the tree line trembled as if space vibrated in micro-oscillations. When I reached the car, the radio turned on by itself, and a calm, female voice repeated a phrase on a loop. "You shouldn't have come back here." "Henry!" I turned off the car, but the sound continued, now coming from inside the dashboard. I ripped out the wires and the sound persisted, as if it were being transmitted through the air with no physical source. For the first time, I felt genuine panic. There was no noise, no wind, just that phrase hanging over the empty field. I drove home in silence. In the rear-view mirror, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. The reflection showed a different sky. An orange twilight, while in front of me the world was already completely dark. I blinked and the two skies overlapped, a fragmented image flickering like a damaged VHS tape. When I reached the garage, I noticed something even more disconcerting. My car was already parked there. Same model, same license plate. The engine was off, but still warm. The driver's door was slightly open. I walked into the house. Everything was the same except for two glasses in the sink, two sets of keys on the table, two identical coats hanging up. The television was on by itself, showing a channel with no image, just white noise. Amidst the static, a silhouette began to form, my own. I stared at the reflection on the screen, and it stared back at me a second before I moved. The sound of the buzzing filled the entire room. The clock's hands began to turn back slowly, scratching the glass. Time was folding in on itself. I picked up the poster and noticed the texture had changed again. Now the photo showed not just my face, but two, side by side. The one on the left looked younger, the one on the right older. And below it, a new line of text was printed, "Integration in progress, phase 4. I threw the paper on the floor and a draft of cold air rushed through the house. The lights all went out at once. For a moment, I thought I heard two breaths synchronized with my own. When I turned on the flashlight, there was only silence. But the living room mirror was fogged up, and a sentence was written inside out. "You're too late." I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, trying to grasp what was real. The clock started working again, but now it read 20:35, the exact date on the poster. I turned on my phone, and the screen displayed an impossible notification. "Backup restored successfully. Welcome back, Henry." The static became high-pitched, constant. Something was correcting reality, and I didn't know which version of me would be erased. The sound of the wind cut through the empty station parking lot, and each footstep echoed as if the concrete were hollow. I held the poster in both hands, the same one I'd found 10 years earlier, now reprinted, but with one almost imperceptible difference: the background. In the bottom corner was an official seal I'd never noticed before, something that looked governmental, the kind of seal you see on confidential documents. The ink was new, fresh, and the disappearance date was tomorrow. I tried to track down the seal. I sent the image to colleagues at other universities, one of them a former Department of Transportation employee. None of them officially acknowledged it, but one of them, a man named Collins, called me late one night and said something I've never forgotten. This symbol, it appears in Project Lattice documents. It was an experimental program on temporal memory. It was shut down in 2013. Where did you see it? When I mentioned the poster, the silence on the other end was so long I thought the line had been disconnected. Collins disappeared 2 days later. No response to emails, his phone disconnected, his home address empty. I went to his house an hour's drive away and found open boxes, burned papers in the yard, and a still warm laptop. On the screen, only a window. Runlog Lattice Restore 013. I copied the file to a flash drive before the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and out of nowhere the kitchen clock started running backward. I spent the next few days trying to open the file. It was encrypted, but some of the text was legible. Lines of code and fragments of reports. Subjects exposed to controlled temporal discrepancy. Physical print of previous event confirmed. Automatic correction in 72 hours. One term kept repeating. Feedback loop subject number 0921. When I finally found the final attachment, the name knocked me out of my chair. It was mine. I reread the passage countless times. Subject 0921 reported visual hallucination related to personal disappearance material. The anomaly was accepted as a natural result of primary line reconfiguration. Report date: August 15, 2013, 10 years before the original poster. If this were real, then I wasn't investigating a case. I was the case. And the disappearance listed on the poster wasn't a prediction. It was a correction. I tried to warn someone, but the messages I sent began bouncing back with errors. Emails would delete themselves immediately after being sent. Calls wouldn't go through. Even my browser history would disappear when I closed the tab. With each new attempt, the world seemed less tangible. Sound stretched like melted magnetic tape, and the reflections in the windows no longer matched my movements. I decided to return to the warehouse where it all began. The same empty parking lot, the same yellow light distorted by streetlights. On the ground where the old sign had been, there were now dozens of them, all with different dates. 2013, 2015, 2019, 2026, 2033. Each one bore my face, slightly altered, older, more tired, more faded. On the last one, the disappearance date was today. Suddenly I felt a force pulling me back, as if the air were being rewritten. The lights began to flicker in sync with my heartbeat, and everything around me fragmented into tiny freeze frames. The sensation wasn't of being dragged, but of being copied, as if reality were duplicating me to correct something I had caused. Then the voices began. They didn't come from outside, but from within, like memories that shouldn't exist. "You saw the poster too soon," one said. "You activated the loop." Another murmured, "The correction has already begun. You shouldn't remember." They all spoke in my own timbre, in variations of my voice. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Only static. When the air settled again, the parking lot was empty. No posters. No lights, no sounds. On the ground, only the flash drive, now burned. And, stuck to the nearest lamppost, a new poster, still damp from the glue, missing since October 10th, 2025. Below, a final line in tiny font. Status anomaly corrected. It hasn't been long since I found that last poster, or maybe it's been years. Time has stopped behaving linearly ever since. Sometimes I wake up believing I'm in 2013, other times in 2025. Everything seems right for a moment, until I notice something out of place. A calendar with repeating days. A voicemail I haven't yet recorded. A shadow moving in the wrong direction. My life has become a succession of versions that can't quite line up. I tried to record what was happening. I set up cameras at home, recorded audio, and wrote down dates. But each recording changes when I play it back. The tapes skip seconds or show me sleeping at times when I was awake. One night, I watched a recording and saw myself writing this same sentence with a subtle difference. In that version, my left hand was shaking. In this one, it's my right. The authorities don't take me seriously. I went to the local police station with the original poster, but the officer who helped me swore he'd seen me before, reporting an identical case months earlier. When I asked if there was a record, he hesitated and said, "The file has been deleted. It seems it never existed." The way he looked at me, it was as if he were recognizing something he shouldn't have. At this point, I began to suspect that my own mind was the experiment. Project Lattice wasn't studying time, but human consciousness in perceptual loops. Maybe reality hadn't failed. Maybe I'd just been trying to reboot myself. And with each cycle, I came back a little more worn, a little less real, a little more observant. Some nights I hear a metallic sound coming from the walls, like an old projector turning on. The light changes hue. White turns amber, amber turns blue. And then I see the scene again. Me finding the poster, the wind blowing, the same moment repeating itself endlessly. Only now I'm outside the scene, an observer, watching myself discover what I already know. The evidence I'd saved, the posters, the flash drive, the reports, began to disappear one by one. First the paper yellowed, then dissolved into fine dust. The flash drive is now just a melted piece of plastic. The notes fade as I write, as if the ink refuses to set. Everything seems determined to correct itself, to remove the error that is me. It was then that I realized the true meaning of the seal on the poster. It didn't mark a human authority. It was a system code. A reboot signature. Project Lattice wasn't shut down. It's still active, adjusting what shouldn't exist. Adjusting me. I was subject 0921, because 0921 was the current cycle of the experiment. Each repetition a new iteration, Now I see the world in small glitches. People repeat identical gestures. Sentences return with the same errors. Cars pass in the exact same sequence every morning. It's not a coincidence, it's a simulation. And I, the only one who remembers previous versions, am the bug that persists between fixes. The disappearance announced on the poster isn't physical. It's existential. If anyone finds this, it might already be too late. Maybe they're reading the corrected version, where my name never existed, where the poster shows another face, another date, another error in the fabric of reality. I don't know how much time is left before the correction reaches me again, but I can feel the world adjusting around me. With every blink, everything feels a little smoother, a little more right, a little less mine. I'm looking at the footage now. The file is called loopwhatfinal.move. It begins with the sound of wind, then the image of the empty parking lot. I appear in the scene walking toward the poster, only this time I'm already there. Two versions of me staring at each other. The video cuts abruptly, and before I can even press the stop button, the screen goes black. The tape ends before I even hit record.